Hey folks, I'm with Dr. Scott Walter once again, and today we're going to talk about some stuff that Andrej Karpathy and Lex Fridman talked about Teslabot and why on the hardware and software end, it's going to be so unique and why Tesla is uniquely poised. But first of all, I see that you're out in Florida near the launch site because you're getting ready for the Falcon Heavy launch, right?
Yeah, it's right behind us. 39A and B are behind us. The closer one is 39B, the Artemis, and the furthest one is where Falcon Heavy is going to go out. It's not,
Cool.
it's moving out to the pad right now. It should be going vertical very, very soon. And we're actually at the National Seashore here, the Playa Linda National Seashore. So we're about as
Gotcha.
close as you can get without actually being on the Cape. Now, do you
That's
know what the
amazing.
Falcon Heavy looks like?
Boy, I really wish that we had a model that we could show off to people. That would be really, really
Okay.
cool. It's like, oh,
Ah,
wait,
whoa,
Alien
wait a minute.
Space is photobombing our video. What?
Okay.
Now we have a Falcon Heavy demonstration model. So, yes, that should be launching tomorrow, which will probably be today. Actually, it'll probably have launched before I even release the video. So there you go. That is a great model. Do you want to plug whoever made that? Because that's awesome.
uh, a company out of here in Florida called Bohemso. Yeah,
Cool.
they do great work. So
Yeah.
I was
I
like,
need one for back there. And speaking of which, check this out. Now that we're showing off things, I
yeah,
actually like helped to write this book. So that's pretty awesome. That's going back on my shelf soon. But yeah, I think I need to contact them and get myself a Falcon Heavy or something like that. Starship. Bye. We photobombed. All right. So anyway,
A lot
yeah,
of
there's a
visitors
great
were
shot.
earlier photobombing us.
Yeah, I know we had an alligator in the background. We've got the launch pad. I can see them a little bit in the background. Anyway,
Yeah.
without further ado, let's cut back to the studio and actually talk about the video. Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. As previously said in the intro, I am joined by Dr. Scott Walter, who is in a hotel at Cape Canaveral right now. So getting ready for the Falcon Heavy launch. I wish I could be down there. But we wanted to talk about a little chunk of the Lex Fridman, Andrej Karpathy interview where they discuss the Teslabot and why Tesla is really the only the only company that can then reasonably make a Teslabot, probably the only country too. I doubt there's any countries that have this level of skill collectively without having an awful lot of
Yeah.
overhead. So yeah,
And remember, it is Halloween,
it's
so
Halloween.
I had to dress up, and
You are now the March of Nines.
I am the March of Nines, exactly. And we all know what the March of Nines is.
And
And
everybody who likes Tesla full self-driving beta really should actually like just make that shirt. You don't even have to buy it. Looks like a couple of clips and a black shirt.
but Fazad's coming up with it. I gave him my idea and said, make a T-shirt out of it.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's awesome.
So I'm
That's
waiting for the
perfect.
problems didn't show up in time for Halloween, so I had to
Yeah.
come up with a homebrew. And I think the funny
So
thing is,
yeah.
I don't think Andre actually ever says the March of Nines, but I think he might say something like chasing the nines or something like that.
Yeah, they definitely talk about it. So anyway, your shirt.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things he says a few times. People notice he says entropy quite a few times.
He does. He really loves the
Yeah.
word entropy. So
Yeah.
he actually
Yeah.
talks about, in my mind, he talks about humanity as if it was a like a code base. It's very interesting to listen to him talk.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
like that
Exactly.
one.
Exactly. Yes. It is kind of funny that the humor you get, that everything is referential back to the code, how the
Right.
code is set up. And there's something else he says a few times that I think we're going to get into it. So I'll hold off till
Absolutely.
then.
So anyway, without further
Yeah.
ado, let us go ahead and let me share the screen here so I can get image of Lex. So, and again, apologies for the not great audio quality from Scott, but he's in a hotel room with with whatever mic he has. So that's the way it goes. I do want to make a quick point here before we start playing back this video that I was blown away by the watches because Lex Fridman famously wears an Omega Speedmaster here that Joe Rogan gave him. Like during the podcast where they were talking, he just gave it to him. So that's pretty interesting, right? Yeah. Anyway, so anyway, but then Andrej Karpathy is wearing the watch that I'm wearing right now. And by the way, I do have an Omega Speedmaster as well. I don't have that one. That one's really cool. It's got a moon phase. But anyway, I thought that was kind of
I have a smartwatch and I have to get it charged if I want it to work tomorrow, so I'm not wearing it.
Yeah, so it's not being worn right now. Anyway, yeah, you'll notice like it's so funny because I kept watching the video and going like, oh, Andre's even got the same watch band that I do for the Apple Watch Ultra. Okay, so anyway, we're going to start. This is the 1 hour and 52-minute mark. Yes, out of 3.5 hours. It is a marathon. And obviously, I'll leave the link in the description so you can watch the whole thing because it is well worth it. But anyway, here we go, starting with Lex, and then Andre responds to that. And by the way, stop me whenever you want, Scott.
Speaking of fleet, the second thing is the mass manufacturers, just knowing culturally driving towards a simple robot that's cheap to produce at scale.
Yeah.
And doing that well, having experience to do that well, that changes everything. That's why that's a very different culture and style than Boston Dynamics, who, by the way, those robots are just the way they move. It's like it'll be a very long time before Tesla can achieve the smoothness of movement. But that's not what it's about. It's about the entirety of the system.
So we will stop there. Okay.
I didn't have the bell, but I figured that's the way. I need a big red button. All right.
We'll do the big red button. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay.
Smoothness of movement.
There was a couple things there. I'm going to say the last thing that, because he was talking about Boston Dynamics is maybe not set up for mass production because they're not a mass production company.
Right.
And Andre is going to go into something about that a little bit later, but we'll wait to that step. The main thing that I thought was interesting because Lex has done a lot of consulting with Boston Dynamics, so he's really well aware of what's gone into that. And so he knows that they've done a lot to get the fluidity of the human motion. But I'm kind of surprised that he thinks it's going to take Tesla a long time to be able to replicate that. Now, I don't know if he's talking about doing backflips and stuff like that. I think he's just really talking about whether the motion looks really fluid. And we already talked about it in our previous videos along with Gary about how it's evolved so quickly.
Right.
So I'm kind of surprised as someone that knows what neural nets can do that he seems to be, I would say, not as confident in the ability for it to be able to do that. I think Andre pushes back a little bit, and if Andre doesn't, I'm pushing back because I think it's going to get that fluid motion pretty quick.
Okay.
And then,
but you're saying within a contained, like walking and moving, basically.
Yeah, with walking, because it already looked pretty fluid to me. We already saw the evolution.
Right.
What we saw Bumblebee doing was already pretty good because, like I say, it wasn't just moving the arms and the legs; it was moving everything in there. And that's always been a challenge in robotics is we break down, engineering, we always break things down into systems. So we have a system of arms, a system of legs, and we have the torso system. And we can figure out how to move them independently. And then we try to figure out, how do we put them together so they're kind of aware of each other and they actually take advantage of their movements to help them out. And sometimes you can see that system is cobbled together. Whereas when I was looking at the motion of the Teslabot, I said, oh, it understands it's actually made up of 28 degrees of freedom, not including the fingers, of the whole and sum. And so it's taking account on that. And that's something the neural net does very easily, something that a heuristic has a really hard time being able to capture.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Makes very good sense. All right. So let's continue on and take a listen to what Lex has to say and then what Andre has to say.
Like we talked about, the data engine and the fleet. And that's super exciting. Even the initial sort of models. But that too was really surprising. That in a few months you can get a prototype.
Yep. And the reason that happened very quickly is, as you alluded to, there's a ton of copy paste from what's happening on the autopilot. Yes. A lot. The amount of expertise that came out of the woodworks at Tesla for building the human robot was incredible to see.
Yeah, I was actually going to wait until he talked about the people with screwdrivers. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine.
Okay, well, then that becomes out. But that's the word he starts talking a lot about: copy paste, copy paste, copy paste.
Right. Yeah.
And that kind of hit me really hard that it was so easy for them to be able to just take the FSD computer and put it in there. And I think at that point he was just mentioning that, well, at first we thought we had to put it in the parking lot because navigating the parking lot. But the other thing to remember about this is the FSD computer knows how to drive. It doesn't know how to walk.
Right.
So it's like, wow, okay, they already get something to help with the navigation. And then was that also now part of the FSD or whatever subsystem they use for the driving part? Now, you might know a bit more about that. How is that actually separated in there? The FSD is doing the navigation? and then telling what system how to steer? Is that being done by the neural nets?
The neural networks, I don't believe, are involved in the policy part of it. So
Okay.
that would be a major change with Teslabot, and that's actually worth exploring. I mean, first of all, just to reiterate the fact that copy paste, mostly that would be on the software end of things, obviously, because the robot doesn't look like a car, even though the manufacturing techniques are similar. But so he was just saying basically, and what it looked like was they kind of whole hog took full self-driving software, the whole stack, and just stuck it in a box on the computer and said, here, let's see how this works. So I imagine that, early on, they didn't even have a robot. They just had a bunch of sensors that were approximately where the robot's eyes would be. And they probably just moved it around and said, can it make sense of the world? And I think that's what Andre was talking about. I think he actually gets to this later. You're alluding to something that he said they wanted to do the demos in the parking lot originally because the car knew about parking lots and it knew about the outside world, but not about the inside in the factory. So clearly a lot of retraining had to be done, but to take that architecture that they already had and put it in. Now, as far as I understand it, the neural networks are the upstream part of the whole thing. So they take in the raw images, they process the vision, they do the occupancy networks, they understand the world, and then the policy code is probably like, given these outputs, turn the steering wheel 2 degrees to the right or something, clockwise, right? Yeah.
And that might be almost a standard control system at that point.
Yeah. And so I think that part is relatively easy. Now, I guess ultimately the end of Optimus, it would probably be that, right? It's like move this actuator.
Yeah, in the end, it could be drive forward at a certain velocity, and that gets turned into, we need to press the pedal down this much, and we need to make sure the steering wheel is like this. And that's a fairly simple kind of control system.
Right.
When you decide to tell Optimus to do that, well, it's not quite so easy as hitting the accelerator. It's really figuring out everything else. And that's where I wonder if they had to develop a separate neural network to be able to do that part, the policy or the walking bit. So there's the navigating and there's actually the execution of the plan.
And yeah, so this is obviously, we're speculating at this point because they didn't say this at AI Day, but it would be reasonable to assume that they've placed more neural networks on the back end of Optimus than are on the car.
I would think so. Yeah. I would think so. Yes.
Because we've talked about this before. You've talked about the slop that's involved, especially with like the fingers and the cables and all of those things. In order to control that, you can't have a simple PID type controller or something. You need something with more understanding of what it's doing. So it would make a lot of sense that there would be a neural network. Now, ultimately, at the end, it's like apply this much voltage to this actuator to make it turn a certain amount or something like that.
Yeah.
But up until that point.
Yeah. In the end. Yeah. And then the data that goes between these two neural networks is probably pretty small, because all you're doing is saying, I want you to go forward. I want you to turn a little bit to the left. And that's it. That's what I want you to do. And now you're going to turn that into all the instructions. And then you've got something else, which is, of course, creating a lot more outputs to be able to control all the actuators to do that.
Yeah. And I could see even things like balance and basic walking. They didn't again say this, but given the fact that it evolved very, very rapidly, and they showed that little animation of it, like walking, like, really stupidly, and then eventually getting to the toe off, very normal looking walk. It seems like, given the rapidity with which it was able to learn how to do this, there had to have been some neural networks involved.
That's what I think.
Logical.
That's what I absolutely think. Yeah. Yep. And that's why I think, again, going back to Lex is not so, he just doesn't think they're going to be able to move ahead that quickly.
Right.
But seeing that, it's like, well, these neural networks, if they can train, and they're just going to get better and better, and they're going to learn really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very interesting stuff. All right, let's go back and share this again, because we're going to get to more of this stuff. I do want to talk about the screwdrivers and things like that in just a minute. And Andre is just about to get to that, I think, if I'm remembering.
You get the bell this time.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, basically, Elon said at one point, we're doing this. And then next day, basically, like, all these CAD models started to appear. And people talking about, like, the supply chain and manufacturing. Yeah. And people showed up with, like, screwdrivers and everything, like, the other day and started to, like, put together the body. And I was like, whoa, like, all these people exist at Tesla. And fundamentally, building a car is actually not that different from building a robot. The same, and that is true, not just for the hardware pieces. And also, let's not forget hardware, not just for a demo, but manufacturing of that hardware at scale is like a whole different thing. But for software as well, basically this robot currently thinks it's a car.
It's going to have a midlife crisis at some point.
It thinks it's a car. Some of the earlier demos, actually, we were talking about potentially doing them outside in the parking lot, because that's where all of the computer vision was like working out of the box.
Yes.
All right. So there we go. So, yeah, that's where we got to. But, you can hear how, first of all, how excited Andrej is. And I really love that.
Mhm.
I think it's marvelous that he's excited about this stuff. And we're going to get to dopamine in a minute. So,
Yep.
But I think the idea that he was like, look, Elon Musk said, I want to build a robot. There weren't 100 committee meetings. There weren't like all of this stuff that happened in party planning committees and all of these other things about how we're going to do this. They just showed up with screwdrivers and CAD models, and they're like, let's give it a go. Let's see what happens.
No, it was an Amish barn raising.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty
We're
much
going to
what
build
it
a
was.
barn. Everyone shows up.
Yeah, exactly. What do you got for us?
Exactly.
So, yeah, and it's really remarkable to think about how uniquely suited Tesla is to do this job. This is not something that most companies can handle. They just don't have the breadth of different skills that are necessary, and the culture. I mean, the fact that literally people showed up and they're like, let's take a soldering iron and put these pieces together and see what happens.
But when you heard that, were you at all surprised?
No, not at all.
I wasn't either. And why? That's exactly what Joe Justice has been saying, is how it works.
Yeah.
It's like something, people just kind of come over and just start working on stuff to get things fixed, and they go off and then do something else. So that is the culture. That's why it works.
I think the thing that's really, really cool about this, and maybe the insight that I gleaned more than anything else, is that there was a hardware and software were working together from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And you could imagine, like, okay, the guys on the factory floor, like bolting things together and soldering and spot welding and whatever, that those guys might work together, but not the software people. But I love the fact that it was just like from day one, they're like CAD models, people with screwdrivers, the software team, everybody's just like scrumming together and making this thing happen. So it's really, really cool to think that Tesla is able to pivot that rapidly. So
and that everyone felt that they could contribute something. They had something of value. They thought, oh, this is great, but I bet there's something I know that everyone else in the team doesn't know. I want to make sure they're aware of that.
Right.
But everyone's input is validated.
Yeah. And even to some extent, just the childlike excitement. I mean, Andrej was exhibiting that, but I imagine, at least from meeting a lot of the Tesla engineers, that there is that sort of like excitement. It's like, oh gosh, we get to do what? We get to play with, we get to play with actuators and robot stuff, and like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you could see the excitement. I mean, either he's the world's best actor, in which he you say, oh, you have really, but he's outside now. And you can see that. No, he really sees that whole program and that whole project is going really well. The confidence he was exuding about FSD and everything else made me way more bullish on how everything was. So
I think
Andrej was nice to hear from him.
People often accuse Elon Musk of being like a Barnum, a P.T. Barnum kind of character, where he's just fluffing stuff and he's making it sound great and getting people excited and all that. Andrej Karpathy is like the guy who's actually working. He's not paid to to like pump this stuff up, and the fact that he's excited is really bullish, because it's something that's like, oh my gosh, that's for real happening. I think it's just marvelous. And also just to touch on something that he talks about later in this interview, I think it's after this, but Andrej talks about why he left Tesla, and he's really a doer. That's what I call him, a researcher, but he wants to do. And what he said was he ended up in management, just de facto, because they had to have somebody managing all this stuff. And he just found that less and less satisfactory. And so good for him for stepping away when it got to that point.
Yes. And I can definitely understand that. I think anyone who's come from that low level and says, oh, the career path is you have to become a manager. A lot of people are like, no, I don't want to be that.
Right, right. And I think it was sort of like Elon Musk has been CEO of these companies, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't find anybody else. And it sounded like what happened with Andre was that he ended up being in the management position, not because he wanted to be there, but just because somebody had to do it.
Had to do it, right.
Yeah.
And now he can probably come back in a completely different role.
Right.
And it can be the role that he dictates, and everyone sort of understands, okay, this is what you want to do.
Right.
Come in as like a fellow and you just work wherever you want, and you go and you just kind of research, because this is probably good, this little sabbatical he's having, that he's learning so much.
Oh yeah.
And that he's able to dig in and find things that I think they're all going to say, wow, that is new things, because he's able to look at stuff that he probably wouldn't be able to in Tesla, and play with things that he wouldn't be able to. Right. And that's actually a benefit. That is a huge benefit, to have someone who is playing outside the sandbox. Right. And they come back in and they bring in new ideas.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And just that level of excitement and everything again, too. It's kind of a recharge your battery sort of situations. Yeah. Yep. I think you're right. That probably is what he would do, is he'd say, I want to come back. And he clearly wants to come back to work on not just Teslabot, but the AGI aspect. That was what seemed to get him excited. He was like, I really am interested in this AGI thing. So I could see him coming back in a year. I mean, he might not take that much time off ultimately if he doesn't find something else to do. But all right, let's continue on. And I don't remember exactly how much more of this, but let's just take a look and we'll plow ahead for a little while longer. So all right. Anyway, it's good stuff. As if people haven't noticed that already, this is fantastic stuff. So you definitely need to watch the whole thing.
Instead of like inside. But all the operating system, everything just copy pastes. Computer vision mostly copy pastes. I mean, you have to retrain the neural nets, but the approach and everything, and data engine and offline trackers and the way we go about the occupancy tracker and so on, everything copy pastes. You just need to retrain the neural nets. And then the planning control, of course, has to change quite a bit. But there's a ton of copy paste from what's happening at Tesla. And so if you were to go with the goal of like, okay, let's build 1 million human robots, and you're not Tesla, that's a lot to ask. If you're Tesla, it's actually like, it's not that crazy.
And then the follow-up question is then how difficult, just like with driving, how difficult is the manipulation task, such that it can have an impact at scale? I think depending on the context, the really nice thing about robotics is that unless you're doing manufacturing and that kind of stuff, is there's more room for error.
Yep.
Driving is so safety critical, and so that and also time critical. Like a robot is allowed to move slower, which is nice.
Yes, I think it's going to take a long time. But the way you want to structure the development is you need to say, okay, it's going to take a long time. How can I set up the product development roadmap so that I'm making revenue along the way? I'm not setting myself up for a 0-1 loss function where it doesn't work until it works. You don't want to be in that position. You want to make it useful almost immediately, and then you want to slowly deploy it and
at scale,
at scale. And you want to set up your data engine, your improvement loops, the telemetry, the evaluation, the harness, and everything. And you want to improve the product over time incrementally, and you're making revenue along the way. That's extremely important, because otherwise you cannot build these large undertakings, just like don't make sense economically. And also from the point of view of the team working on it, they need the dopamine along the way. They're not just going to make a promise about this being useful. This is going to change the world in 10 years when it works. This is not where you want to be. You want to be in a place like I think Autopilot is today, where it's offering increased safety and convenience of driving today. People pay for it, people like it, people purchase it. And then you also have the greater mission that you're working towards.
Mm-hmm. And you see that. So the dopamine for the team, that was a source of happiness.
Yes, 100%. You're deploying this, people like it, people drive it, people pay for it, they care about it. There's all these YouTube videos. Your grandma drives it. She gives you feedback. People like it. People engage with it.
All right, so I'll just stop right there. But I wanted to get to the YouTube part, because there's YouTube videos on this, and I was like, yeah, there are YouTube videos on this. And just before we go back and touch on the rest of this, I do want to say one of the fascinating things I discovered at AI Day was that a lot of the engineers at Tesla and people that work there like knew who I was, which was number one, completely shocking. And number two, were like really appreciative. And not just me, but obviously like Chuck Cook and Dave Lee and all these other guys who do all of this amazing work on YouTube. And that's really cool to know that there's kind of an ecosystem. There's a cyclical thing where people know who you are now, obviously, and there's an appreciation from the people who are working really hard every day to make this stuff happen. to the fact that other people are talking about it and giving them that like pat on the back, the virtual pat on the back.
Yes. And now I think both of us, we were putting our fingers up because that's a good point, but we wanted to keep going because it's such a good clip. We didn't want to stop. And you did notice that this is water, but I ended up having to take 4 shots along the way because it's like copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. So
exactly.
That's what was going on there.
I'm waiting for software 2.0, and then
yeah, well, that's completely different clip. No, but
well, that's
what he's talking about is really interesting from 2 points of view, and I think we touched on this before in a couple of conversations. And one of them is that Tesla is in a better position financially to be able to pull off this trick, because anyone else is trying to build the robot, all they're doing is they're burning through cash. They have to keep on doing a capital raise until they can get the product out there. And if it's going to be 10 years, that's a long time to go through a cash burn to be able to get it up to that point that you actually can start making money on it. Tesla does not have to make money on it because they already have an internal use where they will save money. And that's going to be good enough. That's the revenue generation that allows them to keep on going. So that's the first thing, is that it makes sense financially. The other, of course, is from the standpoint of it being like a really challenging project, and you've got this 10-year goal, and there's no sense of urgency of getting there. It's like, I'll just kind of work on a little bit today. There's nothing that and that's, I've always felt, like the problem with hydrogen fusion. It's 30 years away, we can take our time, we can go to some symposiums here and put together a conference and let's talk about this. And it's like, and nothing gets done. And here it's like, let's just get something started. And that's why these garage startups are so successful, is you have a small team that gets something together that already you see there's something there. And then you just build and build and build and build and build. And eventually you have something which is very complex, but every step of the way, you are feeling satisfied because, wow, it's working. I'm actually seeing it starting to work. And it's not something that, it's still just all these bolts and things, but eventually we'll bolt them together and they'll start to work. And that was always my problem with the ADA language. Has anyone heard of the ADA language? That was going to be the language to take over all languages and operating systems. Remember back in the 80s?
Yeah.
And they tried to do so much that it didn't get off the ground because there was no sense of urgency. Like, okay. And then people working on it, and they just, where are we going to finally get to the end there? So they're taking the right approach, and that is, let's get something which is the absolute minimum basic. Let's not throw too much on there, but we can already see the utility. And you can see how pumped up everyone is at AI Day when it came out walking the stage. And the validation. And I know that personally from working on software projects where, to me, it just felt like there is no utility in this project. And it gets in someone's hands, and they start using it, and they're excited, and then you're seeing when it's working. So the first time we were able to get robots to move from our offline programming software, man, was that a hit. Because at that point, I thought, this is a stupid video game we're putting together. There's no utility. It's lots of fun for me, but there's no practical use. Why am I even getting paid for this? And then engineer uses it and is excited. And then suddenly it comes back to me and it's like, wow, we're pumped up. And we always found with our own company, a lot of times we have to get the engineers out and send them to like a trade show and a couple other places where they can see the customers who are using it and are really excited. And they go back really pumped up. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, I think the human engineering aspect of this should not be underrated. It's a very important thing that you can't have a team, just a human being in general, no matter who it is not going to be motivated forever without any kind of reward. So there's got to be something.
You need it.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other part of this is that what was I going to say? The dopamine level is like, those dopamine hits are really important, but it's also the fact that you've got what I've been calling sustainable philanthropy, which I think is a unique thing that Elon Musk companies are doing. And Twitter is going to do this as well. And that is that he is trying to do a public good with his companies. So, which is philanthropy, that's traditional philanthropy, but most philanthropy is please give us money so we can do good. Right. And what he's saying is like, no, I'm going to make a business out of this so that I can actually make money doing philanthropic stuff and keep bootstrapping to, he wants to get us on the planet. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think as Andre called it 0 to 1, right? It's like you can't have this like no product for 10 years and then suddenly there's a product. You just can't do that. That doesn't work for anybody.
And again, he's using the loss function.
Right. I know. I love that. I was like, that's great.
Once again, 0 1 loss function.
He's very, you can tell he's very much a he thinks like a coder, and he thinks like specifically like an AI, a machine learning type of coder. It's like all about the loss functions, all about the metrics, all about the entropy, and all about the loss. And he talks about, the business itself as an entropic entity. And I think Elon talks about that too. So the two of them share that language. But anyway, I think that's just marvelous to listen to him talk about it that way. But it's very exciting. And so, you were saying they'll use it in the factory, but in my mind, what Andre's implying here a little bit is that they're going to try to sell these things relatively early on to
right.
Yeah.
Yes, and as soon as they're able to find a use case outside of the factory,
right,
and it's not going to do everything, but it's going to do something useful.
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea, is keep on finding some incremental thing, because the way to get up to the top of the stairs is to go one stair at a time, right?
Yeah.
The whole idea is like you got to build a staircase, and if you're just trying to jump to the top, you're never going to make it.
But I will recast that a little bit by turning back to 2008 or 9 when the Roadster came out. There were enough people who spent a lot of money on a toy car. That was just not a very practical car at the time, right?
Right.
But so if they just said, listen, we're going to sell this thing for $80,000 and it doesn't do that much, there would be a group of people who would grab that up. I couldn't afford it, but I'm just saying there will be.
Yeah, there would be. There absolutely would be. Yeah, there absolutely would be. Yes, I agree. There'd be a lot of people that say that, and there are a lot of people that just love buying some of these weird toys. I mean, there are these little robots that you can buy that, not sure how much they are, that Seiko and others I think came out with, and
well, think about think of
when it first came out.
Not a robot.
Yeah, it's not a robot, but I remember when it first came out, and it was a bit of a gimmick. Should I or should I not? And then then I laid down the bucks for it, and I'm like, it's not a robot. That's when I discovered that it wasn't.
Right. But
that's another video rant we could do sometime.
We're going to have to do a whole video on what is a robot. But I think it's worth noting the fact that there are a group of consumers who at the very get-go, when this thing wasn't even really able to do much, the only real concern would be a safety concern. I did love the fact that both Lex and Andre specifically note the fact that we've talked about before, which is that robots are simpler in some sense because they don't move fast. Unlike cars, which are moving at very, very high speeds and are really heavy. And so everything is critical with them. The robot itself, unless it like falls over, and even then it doesn't weigh that much. So,
and the other thing about falling over, that remember they showed in AI Day, the robot falling over, and it just goes like that. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I don't think the robot's going to be that dumb when it falls over. It's going to do what we do and put the hands out, or it's going to figure out how to do a roll. So I'm expecting there's going to be some sort of reflex action built in to do that.
Yeah. So, but I was mostly talking about from a consumer point of view. Like there is a certain safety limit that they would have to achieve before they would be allowed to sell these robots to consumers.
Right. I think so. I think so.
In a factory, you can block them off and put them inside a cage if you need to while they're experimenting with them, but not in the home. You can't trust that a consumer will do that. But anyway, so that actually made me happy, because I was thinking like, we'll never be able to get one because they'll just use them in the factories and they'll just make tons of them to do that. But I'm like, no, I think, given what Andre's talking about, they might actually decide to release these things to the masses out there, at least to other factories and stuff, to let them work. So, and that's great. And again, that idea of just, even if it's just robot 0.1, that they could at least use it in their factories to make some money back on what they're doing. So it's not just a gigantic money pit that they're putting money in, which it is right now. Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, it's just, I think it's really marvelous to listen to somebody besides Elon Musk talk about this stuff, because it's
I agree.
Another point of view. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You get that second point of view. And we also had it back in the earnings call, was it, I think in January, February, and he was being backed up by Zach, and I'm trying to remember who else was on the, I mean, it was pretty clear that when Elon was making some of these statements about the Teslabot, there was no pushback from anyone else there. As a matter of fact, more confirmation of what he was saying. It's like, we're taking this seriously. We think it's really going to pan out.
Right. And again, I mean, just to go back to what they were talking about, I don't think anyone is positioned like Tesla is positioned. They're just so well positioned to make this happen. It's kind of a remarkable like convergence of technologies that they have.
I agree, because they have all the technologies and they have the internal use case
Right.
that will allow them to do it. And again, the manufacturing expertise, it's just everything that's there. It is a unique combination. It really is.
Yeah, and the urgency too. I think what you were saying is completely reasonable. There's a lot of open source projects. There's a lot of projects that have just died on the vine because there's no urgency to them. And people just kind of tinker at the edges, and it's really cool, and it's a little but this there's definitely a sense of like, we need to get this out the door. Maybe just because of excitement, like, look, people need to see this thing. This is awesome.
Yes.
Like,
but again, if you get something that you know it's going to take 10 years, there's very few investors that have that kind of patience. We're not going to see any revenue for 10 years. I mean, there are some out there, but boy, it's only certain investors that will do it. And again, it is such a roll of the dice. You know, I'm thinking like, you know, pharmaceutical companies. Stuff is like, you're not going to see it. You know, maybe it's going to be a blockbuster drug, maybe it's not, and it's going to be 20 years from now. Really going to invest.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing that maybe the whole COVID disaster, you know, the fact that they had to develop these drugs very rapidly, maybe that will actually help us in general in the future for that kind of stuff. But that's a whole other tangent.
Right.
All right. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, we've kind of covered the part that I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you have any thoughts. Like,
no, that was it. I mean, it's an incredible video. There's no doubt about it. And what is it? It's over 3 hours. And normally when you go to like a 3 hour anything, you know, the movie, opera, whatever, you're like, oh God, I can't wait for this to get over. And occasionally, you know, there'd be that movie that's so great that you're just like, it's over. Oh, no. And it was like one of those. That I was thinking to be able to roll it.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. But anyway, so I agree with you. I think this was one of those interviews that was just so good. It was in its own way, it was like a Tesla AI day. It was like another angle on Tesla AI day, and some really, really lovely stuff. And anyway, everybody needs to watch the whole thing, but hopefully this video was useful and gave you some insight into how Andrej thinks, and also how you know, stuff that we've been talking about, you know, from the outside seems to be making sense for people from the inside as well. So anyway, thank you all for watching and attending, and let us know in the comments what you think. We can obviously pick up the conversation and continue with other topics. And in the meantime, here's to Falcon Heavy launching tomorrow, and you getting to witness it in person from the bleachers at NASA. That's awesome. That's pretty amazing. All right, everybody have a lovely day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.